The bullet went
Oh
through the old man's
my
chest before
God.
anyone even heard the gun go off. He fell backward off the wooden porch of the general store, his body hitting the dusty ground with a sound like a sack of grain dropping. His name was Thomas Price, and he had been the sheriff of Silver Ridge for 23 years. Now he was dead. The whole thing happened in less than 1 second. Sarah Price stood frozen on the other side of the street, holding a basket of eggs she had just bought from the market. The eggs were still warm. She was thinking about making bread for dinner. She was not thinking about watching her father die. But the world does not care about what people are thinking about. The world just happens, and people have to catch up to it or be crushed beneath it. The man with the gun stood on the porch where Sheriff Price had been standing moments before. His name was Jack Morrison, and he was a killer. Not the kind who killed by accident or in self-defense. The kind who killed because he enjoyed it. He was tall and thin, with dark eyes that looked like they had been burned out a long time ago and never quite healed. His gun was still in his hand, smoke curling up from the barrel. He looked down at Thomas Price's body without any expression on his face at all. Then he looked across the street at Sarah. Their eyes met for just a second, and in that second, Sarah understood that she was going to die too, but she did not die. A hand grabbed her shoulder and pulled her backward into the shadow between two buildings. It was Marcus Webb. He was a young man, maybe 25 years old, with red hair and freckles and a scar across his left cheek that he never talked about. Marcus worked as a deputy under Sheriff Price, though most people in town did not think of him as much of anything. He was too young, too quiet, and too gentle for the job. But he was also very fast, and he was very brave in ways that people often did not notice until something terrible happened. Marcus pulled Sarah into the darkness and pressed her back against the rough wood of the building wall. He put his finger to his lips and shook his head very slightly. She understood. She stayed quiet. Outside on the street, Jack Morrison was laughing. It was a sound like rocks falling down a mountain, empty and hard, and without any joy in it at all. He was laughing at the people who were watching him. There were maybe 30 people on the street. Most of them had seen what happened. All of them were frozen, and nobody had moved to help the sheriff. Nobody had tried to stop the killer. They were all just standing there, watching and doing nothing, which was the same as helping. "The sheriff is dead," Jack Morrison said loudly so everyone could hear him. "He is dead because he tried to stop me from taking what belongs to me. He tried to stop me from taking money that should have been my money." He kicked Thomas Price's body with his boot, which was an unnecessary thing to do to someone who was already dead. "I am going to walk to the bank now. I am going to take the money that is inside, and if anyone tries to stop me, I am going to shoot them too. Does everyone understand?" Nobody answered. Nobody even moved. Marcus Webb's face was very pale. Sarah could feel him shaking a little where his body was pressed against hers. She could see that he wanted to do something. She could see that his hand was moving toward the gun at his side. But he did not draw the gun. Instead, he just stood there with Sarah in the darkness, watching the killer walk down the middle of the street toward the bank. The day had started like any other day in Silver Ridge. The sun had come up over the mountains to the east, painting everything orange and gold, for about 30 minutes. Then the sun had moved higher, and the light had become normal again. It was one of those days that was very hot. The kind of day where the air sits on top of you like a blanket and makes it hard to breathe. The dirt of the street had been baked hard by weeks of sun without rain. A few tumbleweed had blown through earlier in the morning. Some chickens were pecking at the ground in the yard behind the hotel. The buildings of Silver Ridge were made of wood and stone. The general store had a sign painted on it that said "General Store" in big letters, with a picture of a wagon wheel below the words. The bank was 2 buildings down, and it was made of stone that had been painted white a long time ago. The paint was peeling now. The windows of the bank had metal bars on the inside to protect the money. Everyone in Silver Ridge had believed that the metal bars would keep the money safe. They had believed that no one would ever be brave enough or crazy enough to rob the bank while a sheriff was alive to stop them. But Jack Morrison had never believed in barriers. He had spent his entire life breaking through things that other people said could not be broken through. Thomas Price had understood that Jack Morrison was coming. He had known it for 3 days because he had received a telegraph from a town called Copper Creek, which was 40 miles to the south. The Telegraph had said that Jack Morrison had killed a man there and stolen $3,000. The Telegraph had said that Jack Morrison was heading north. The Telegraph had said that Jack Morrison was very dangerous and probably did not care if he died or lived, because he had already spent so much of his life killing that death did not frighten him anymore. Thomas Price had been sitting on the porch of the general store at 6 o'clock in the morning, drinking coffee and waiting for Jack Morrison to arrive. He had been thinking about retirement. He had been thinking about going to Arizona where his brother lived. He had been thinking about sitting on a porch that was not in a town where someone might try to kill him. These were probably his last thoughts before the bullet went through his chest. Marcus Webb had not known that the sheriff was sitting on that porch. If he had known, he would have tried to stop him. Or he would have sat with him. Or he would have done something. But he did not know. He was just walking to the sheriff's office to start his shift when he heard the gun go off. He ran toward the sound. He saw Jack Morrison. He saw Thomas Price falling. He saw Sarah Price with her basket of eggs. And then something in his mind told him to get her to safety, which was what he did. Now they were standing in the darkness between two buildings, and they were listening to the killer walk down the street. They were listening to the sound of his boots on the hard earth. They were listening to the silence of 30 people who did nothing. And Marcus Webb was understanding something that would change his entire life. He was understanding that courage did not mean never being afraid. Courage meant being afraid and then doing what needed to be done anyway. Courage meant walking out of the darkness when every part of you wanted to stay hidden. He looked down at Sarah Price's face. She was looking at him. Her eyes were asking a question that he knew how to answer. He took a deep breath, and then he stepped out of the darkness into the hot sun of Silver Ridge, where a killer was walking toward the bank, and where everything that came after would matter more than everything that came before.
Marcus Webb walked out of the shadow very slowly. His boots made small sounds on the dusty ground. The sound was quiet, but in the silence of Silver Ridge, it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Jack Morrison stopped walking. He turned his head and looked at Marcus. When their eyes met, Marcus felt something cold move through his body, like ice water in his veins. This was the moment. This was the second when everything changed. Jack Morrison smiled. It was not a smile that meant happiness or kindness. It was the kind of smile a predator makes when it sees something small and weak trying to be brave. "Well," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the empty street like a stone thrown across water. "Look what we have here. A little deputy who thinks he can stop me." He turned his body so that he was facing Marcus directly. His gun was still in his hand, but it was hanging at his side, not pointed at Marcus. This was worse than if it had been pointed at him, because it meant that Morrison did not think Marcus was a real threat. "You want to die today, boy? You want to end up in the ground like your sheriff?" Marcus did not answer. His mouth was very dry. His heart was beating so fast that he could feel it in his throat. He was trying to remember the things that Thomas Price had taught him about shooting and about staying calm. But what he was remembering most of all was the feeling of Sarah Price's hand on his shoulder back in the darkness. She had been holding on to him like he was the only thing keeping her from falling off the edge of the world. He was not going to let her down. He was not going to run. "I am here to tell you to stop," Marcus said. His voice was shaking a little, but he said the words anyway. "You killed the sheriff. That was wrong. You're going to put the gun down, and you're going to come with me to the jail. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard. But you are not robbing the bank." Jack Morrison laughed again, that hard sound like rocks falling. He shook his head like he could not believe what he was hearing. "You're going to stop me," he said. "You? Just you? Where's the rest of your army, little deputy? Where are all the people who are going to help you?" Marcus looked at the street. The 30 people who had been standing there watching were still standing there. But none of them had moved forward. None of them had pulled their guns. None of them had done anything at all. The street looked very empty suddenly, even though there were many people on it. "They're going to help," Marcus said, but he was not sure if he believed it. "Everyone in this town is going to help. You cannot rob the bank. You cannot kill more people. I already killed the sheriff," Morrison said. "I already did the thing you say I cannot do. So maybe I can do anything I want in this town. Maybe nobody here is strong enough to stop me." He began to walk again, moving toward the bank. He was walking directly toward Marcus. This was a test. This was a moment where Marcus could move out of the way, and the killer would walk past him, and Marcus would have done nothing but try. Or Marcus could do something else. Marcus could be brave. Marcus raised his hand. "Stop right there," he said. Jack Morrison kept walking. He was maybe 10 feet away now, then 8 feet, then 6 feet. Marcus could see the scar on Morrison's face, a long white line that went from his eye to his jaw. Morrison was smiling that terrible smile. "You're going to shoot me?" he asked. "You do not even have a gun drawn, boy. You're too slow. You're too weak. You're going to die today, and nobody is going to remember your name." It happened very fast. Marcus's hand moved to his gun. Jack Morrison's hand moved to his gun. The sound of two guns being drawn at the same time made a strange noise, like two pieces of metal scraping together. But Marcus was faster than he thought he would be. His gun came up first. He did not shoot Jack Morrison in the chest. He shot him in the right shoulder, the shoulder that was attached to the arm that was holding the gun. The gun flew out of Morrison's hand and fell to the ground. Morrison screamed. It was a sound of pain and surprise mixed together. He grabbed his shoulder with his other hand, and blood began to pour between his fingers. He fell down on one knee, and then he fell down on both knees, and then he fell down on his side in the dirt. For a second, nothing happened. The whole street was quiet. The people were staring. Marcus was still standing with his gun pointed at Jack Morrison, and his hand was shaking very badly. He had just shot a man. He had just stopped a killer. He had just changed something in Silver Ridge forever. Then Sarah Price came running out of the darkness between the buildings. She was still holding her basket of eggs, and she was running toward Marcus. "Stop!" Marcus yelled at her. "Stay back. He might have another gun." But Sarah did not stop. She ran to Marcus and grabbed his arm and held on to it very tightly. "You did it," she said. Her voice was shaking too. "You stopped him. You were brave. You did what my father could not do." Marcus did not feel brave. He felt like he was going to throw up. His legs felt like they were made of water. But he kept his gun pointed at Jack Morrison, who was still on the ground, still bleeding, still making soft sounds of pain. Other people began to come forward now. The 30 people who had done nothing before were suddenly moving. 2 of them picked up Jack Morrison's gun and the other gun that had fallen out of Morrison's second holster. Someone said they would go get the doctor. Someone else said they would get rope from the hardware store to tie Morrison up. The town was waking up from its paralysis. The people were moving now. They were doing things. They were helping. But it was Marcus who had done the thing that mattered. It was Marcus who had stepped out of the darkness and refused to accept that evil could just walk through Silver Ridge and take what it wanted. It was Marcus who had discovered that he was stronger and faster and braver than he had ever known. And it was Sarah Price who had shown him that someone believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. Jack Morrison was tied up and locked in a cell by sunset. The doctor came and took the bullet out of his shoulder. The sheriff's body was taken to the funeral house to be prepared. Silver Ridge was changed, and Marcus Webb, the young deputy who everyone had thought was too gentle for the job, had become a hero. But he did not think of himself as a hero. He just thought of himself as a man who had done what needed to be done in the moment when it needed to be done, because the moment had come and there was no one else. That was enough. That was everything. 3 days after Jack Morrison was locked in the jail cell, Thomas Price's funeral was held in Silver Ridge. The church was full of people. It was so full that some people had to stand outside in the hot sun, looking through the windows to see the pastor and the wooden coffin. Sarah Price sat in the front row, dressed all in black. Her face was very calm, but her hands were shaking. She was holding a white handkerchief in one hand and a dried flower in the other. The flower had come from her mother's garden. Her mother had died 5 years before, and her father had kept the garden alive even though he was not a gardener. He had kept it alive because it made him feel close to his wife. Marcus Webb stood at the back of the church. He was wearing a dark suit that belonged to a man named Samuel Curtis, who was a shopkeeper. The suit was too big for Marcus. The sleeves hung down past his wrists. The pants dragged on the ground. But it was the only suit that was available in Silver Ridge, and it was the suit that people wore to funerals. He was there because he was a deputy, even though the position felt strange and heavy on his shoulders now. He was there because he had shot Jack Morrison, and everyone in town wanted to see him and thank him and tell him that he was a hero. But Marcus did not feel like a hero. He felt like a young man who had done one thing that needed to be done, and now everyone expected him to be something more than he was. The pastor said words about Thomas Price. He talked about how the sheriff had been a good man, a fair man, a man who loved his daughter and served his town. He talked about how Thomas Price had given up his chance to have a quiet life in order to make sure that other people could have quiet lives. He talked about death and about the mystery of why some people were taken from the world while others were left behind. Nobody really listened to what he was saying. Everyone was just thinking about how empty Silver Ridge would feel without Thomas Price in it. After the funeral, people came to Sarah Price's house. They brought food. They brought flowers. They brought words of comfort that mostly meant nothing. Sarah accepted all of it because that is what people do at funerals. But what she really wanted was to be alone. What she really wanted was to go to her father's room and sit on his bed and remember what his voice sounded like and what his laugh sounded like and what his hands felt like when they were trying to teach her something. Marcus stood in the corner of Sarah's house, holding a plate of food that he did not want to eat. People kept coming up to him and shaking his hand and telling him that he was brave. An old man named Henry Torres told him that he was the best thing that had happened to Silver Ridge in 20 years. A woman named Catherine Mills told him that her son wanted to be a deputy now because of what Marcus had done. A young girl told him that he was the bravest man in the whole world. All of these words were meant to be kind, but they made Marcus feel more alone, not less alone. Late that afternoon, Sarah found him in the kitchen. She was still wearing her black funeral dress. She had taken her hair down, and it fell over her shoulders. She looked at Marcus for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "My father believed in you before anyone else did. He told me that you were going to be important someday. He said that you had something inside you that other people did not have. He never told me that," Marcus said. "He was saving it for the right moment," Sarah said. "He was waiting for you to understand it about yourself." They stood in the kitchen together, not touching, but very aware of each other's presence. Outside, the sun was beginning to go down. The light came through the windows and made everything look golden and soft. In the jail cell, 3 buildings away, Jack Morrison was sitting on a thin mattress and thinking about what his life had become. That evening, Marcus went to the jail to check on Morrison. The killer was lying on his back on the mattress, looking at the ceiling. His shoulder was bandaged, and he had not been given much food because the people of Silver Ridge were still deciding what to do with him. There were 2 options. They could hang him, which was what most people wanted, or they could send him to the city to stand trial in front of a judge. Marcus was not sure which option was correct. "Hello, Morrison," Marcus said through the bars. Morrison turned his head and looked at Marcus. His eyes were different now. They were not the eyes of a predator anymore. They were the eyes of an animal that was trapped and knew it could not escape. "Come to gloat?" Morrison asked. "No," Marcus said. "I came to ask you a question. Why did you come to Silver Ridge? You had $3,000. You could have gone anywhere. Why come here?" Morrison was quiet for a long time. Then he sat up on the mattress and moved his arm carefully. The pain was still very bad. "I had a brother," he said. "His name was Samuel Morrison. He worked as a hand on the Miller Ranch, about 20 miles from here. One day, the ranch owner accused him of stealing a horse. Samuel did not steal a horse, but nobody believed him. They hanged him from a tree, and nobody came to stop them. Nobody cared." Marcus did not know what to say. "Your sheriff," Morrison continued. "Thomas Price, he was the one who should have come. He should have ridden out there and stopped them. But he did not. He said it was not his jurisdiction. He said it was not his problem. So I made it his problem. I came to Silver Ridge to kill him because I needed him to understand what it feels like when someone you love is taken away from you and nobody does anything to stop it. That was not my father's fault," a voice said from the doorway. Sarah Price was standing there. She had followed Marcus to the jail. She had heard what Morrison said. "That was not my father's responsibility. Your brother made choices, and those choices led to his death. But my father did not kill him. You cannot make my father responsible for something that happened 20 miles away on someone else's land." Morrison looked at Sarah. There was something in his eyes that might have been sadness or might have been regret. "I know that now," he said quietly. I know it too late, but I know it. Marcus realized something in that moment. Jack Morrison had not come to Silver Ridge as a pure killer. He had come as a broken man who was trying to give his pain to someone else. He had come because he did not know what else to do with his grief. But that understanding did not change what he had done. That understanding did not bring Thomas Price back to life. It just explained the darkness inside a human being who had lost everything. "We will send you to the city for trial," Marcus said. "You will be judged by the law, not by us." That night, Marcus lay in his small room above the general store. He was thinking about what it meant to become someone new. He was thinking about how one moment could change your entire life. He was thinking about Sarah Price and about the weight of a gun in his hand and about an old sheriff who had believed in him when nobody else did. And he was understanding that the job was far from over. In fact, the real job was only just beginning. 2 weeks after Thomas Price's funeral, the town council of Silver Ridge met in the back room of the saloon. There were 5 men on the council. There was Joseph Hayes, who owned the bank. There was Samuel Curtis, who owned the general store. There was Father Miguel, who ran the church. There was Henry Torres, the old man who had worked with his hands his whole life. And there was Elizabeth Morgan, who was a teacher and the only woman on the council. They sat around a wooden table and drank coffee and talked about what they were going to do about the job of sheriff. The job was open now because Thomas Price was dead. The town needed a new sheriff. This was very important because a town without a sheriff was a town without order. A town without order was a town where dangerous things could happen. The people of Silver Ridge had already experienced what happened when a killer could walk through the street without anyone to stop him. They did not want to experience it again. "We should offer the job to Marcus Webb," Elizabeth Morgan said. She was a woman with gray hair and intelligent eyes. She had taught Marcus in school when he was a boy. She remembered that he was very quiet and very smart and always tried to be kind to the other students. He stopped Jack Morrison. "He is brave. He understands what the job requires." "He is too young," Joseph Hayes said. He was a man who liked to worry about things. "He is only 25 years old. People will not respect him. They will think he is too soft for the job." "People already respect him," Henry Torres said. "I see it in the way they look at him when he walks down the street. I see it in the way they move out of his way. They respect him because he did something that mattered. That is what creates respect." Samuel Curtis did not say anything at first. He was thinking about the suit he had lent Marcus for the funeral, and how the suit had looked too big on the young man, but how Marcus's presence had made it seem like the suit was supposed to be that way. "I agree with Elizabeth and Henry," he said finally. "Marcus Webb should be the new sheriff. We should go to him and ask him to take the job." Father Miguel nodded. Joseph Hayes was still not happy about it, but he did not argue anymore. When 4 people agreed and only one disagreed, there was no point in arguing. The decision was made. That evening, the 5 council members went to find Marcus. He was at the jail, checking on the prisoners. There was Jack Morrison in one cell, and there was a drunk man named Tom Williams in another cell. Tom Williams had gotten too much whiskey at the saloon and had tried to break a window with his fist. He had cut his hand very badly and needed to be locked up for his own safety. "Marcus Webb," Elizabeth Morgan said when they found him. "We have come to ask you something very important." Marcus looked at the 5 council members. He knew what they were going to ask before they asked it. He had been thinking about it for 2 weeks. He had been wondering if it would happen, and he had been preparing himself for the answer he was going to give. "We want you to be the new sheriff of Silver Ridge," Samuel Curtis said. "We are asking you to take the job. We are asking you to take Thomas Price's position." The jail became very quiet. Jack Morrison was listening from his cell. Tom Williams was listening from his cell. Marcus was listening in his own mind to the voice that was telling him he was not ready, that he was too young, that he was going to make mistakes. "I will do it," Marcus said. "I will be the sheriff." They pinned the star on his chest the next morning in front of the entire town. It was a simple ceremony. Mayor Joseph Hayes gave a short speech about how Marcus Webb had shown courage and bravery and how he was going to be a good sheriff. People clapped. Sarah Price stood near the front of the crowd, and when Marcus looked at her, she was smiling. It was the first real smile he had seen on her face since her father died. Being a sheriff was different from being a deputy. Being a deputy meant that someone else made the decisions. Being a sheriff meant that you made all the decisions yourself. You decided what was right and what was wrong. You decided what the town needed. You decided who was guilty and who was innocent. It was a heavy responsibility. The first real test came 3 weeks later. A man rode into Silver Ridge at sunset. His name was Robert Kane, and he had come from the Miller Ranch, the place where Jack Morrison's brother had been hanged. Robert Kane was a big man with a scarred face and cruel eyes. He said that he had come to break Jack Morrison out of jail and take him away. "The man is innocent," Robert Kane said to Marcus. He was trying to get justice for his brother. He was trying to punish the people who murdered his brother. That is not a crime. That is honor. Marcus understood immediately that this was a test. This was a moment where he had to decide what kind of sheriff he was going to be. He was going to be a sheriff who followed the law, or he was going to be a sheriff who followed his feelings. He understood that these were two different things. Jack Morrison killed the sheriff of this town, Marcus said. He killed an innocent man who never did anything to him. That is a crime. That is not honor. Honor is following the law and letting the law decide who is guilty and who is innocent. Robert Kane looked at Marcus for a long time. Then he looked around at the people of Silver Ridge who had come out of their buildings to listen to this conversation. They were standing behind Marcus. They were showing him that they supported him. That made the difference. "You will not let me take him?" Robert Kane asked. "No," Marcus said. "I will not. And if you try to do it by force, I will stop you. I do not want to shoot you, but I will if I have to." Robert Kane understood that Marcus meant what he said. He turned his horse around and rode back out of Silver Ridge. He did not come back. That night, Marcus stood alone in the sheriff's office. This had been Thomas Price's office. The desk had belonged to Thomas Price. The books on the shelf had belonged to Thomas Price. Everything in a room carried the memory of the man who had come before. Marcus put his hand on the desk and thought about how this was his office now. This was his responsibility. This was his life. There was a knock on the door. Sarah Price came in. She was carrying a key. "This was my father's," she said. "He gave it to me before he died, but he told me that if the right person became sheriff, I should give it to him. This key opens the back office. This is where my father kept his journals. This is where he wrote down the things that mattered. I think you should read them." Marcus took the key and looked at Sarah. In her eyes, he could see that she believed in him. And he understood that believing in someone was sometimes the most important thing that one person could do for another person. Marcus Webb opened the back office door with the key that Sarah Price had given him. The room was small and dark. There was one small window that looked out at the mountains in the distance. There was a wooden desk. There were shelves with books. And there was a metal box sitting in the middle of the desk. This box had been waiting here for Marcus to find it. He sat down in Thomas Price's chair and opened the box. Inside, there were journals. Many journals. Pages and pages of writing in the handwriting of the man who had been the sheriff for 23 years. Marcus opened the first journal. It was dated from 15 years ago. At the top of the first page, Thomas Price had written, "Today I learned something that changed my life forever. I learned that a sheriff's job is not about being strong. It is about being just. It is about being fair. It is about protecting everyone, even the people that no one else cares about." Marcus read the journals for 3 hours straight. He did not stop. He did not eat. He did not move from the chair. He just read and read and read. He learned about decisions that Thomas Price had made. He learned about criminals that the sheriff had caught. He learned about people that the sheriff had helped. He learned about doubts that the sheriff had felt. He learned about moments when Thomas Price was not sure if he was doing the right thing. In one journal entry from 10 years ago, Marcus found something that made his heart stop. Thomas Price had written about a young boy who worked as a deputy. Thomas Price had written, "Today I saw something in Marcus Webb that reminds me of myself when I was young. He has a gentleness in him, but underneath that gentleness is a strength that he does not yet know about. I believe that one day this young man is going to do something that matters. I believe that one day he is going to be the person that this town needs. I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to help him see that about himself." Marcus sat in the darkness and read those words over and over again. His eyes filled with tears. He understood now that Thomas Price had been teaching him all along. Every quiet moment, every small lesson, Every moment when the sheriff had believed in him when he did not believe in himself. All of it had been preparation. All of it had been love. The last journal entry was from the day that Thomas Price died. It was written in the early morning, before the sheriff had gone to the porch of the general store to wait for Jack Morrison. It said, "Tomorrow, I believe that the test is coming. I believe that everything I have tried to teach Marcus Webb is going to be tested. I believe that he is going to become who he is supposed to become. And I believe that I may not be here to see it. But that is all right. That is how life works. We plant seeds, and then we trust that someone else is going to water those seeds and help them grow. Marcus Webb is my seed. I am proud of him. I am ready to let go." Marcus closed the journal and sat in the darkness of that small office and wept like he had not wept since he was a child. 2 days later, Jack Morrison was taken from Silver Ridge to the city for his trial. A judge and a jury were going to decide what to do with him. Marcus rode with him in the wagon to make sure that nothing happened to the prisoner. He was doing his duty as sheriff. On the way to the city, Jack Morrison spoke to Marcus for the first time since that night in the jail cell when he had revealed his story. "You read the journals," Morrison said. He was not asking a question. He knew somehow. "How do you know that?" Marcus asked. "I can see it in your face," Morrison said. "I can see that you understand now. Your sheriff believed in you. That is a rare thing. Most people in this world do not have anyone who believes in them like that. Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because I want you to understand something," Morrison said. "I did not have anyone who believed in me. My brother Samuel had me, but when they took him, I had nothing. I did not have a Thomas Price who was teaching me how to be good. I had anger and grief and nothing else. I'm not trying to ask for forgiveness. I am just trying to explain how a person becomes the kind of person who kills someone innocent. It happens slowly. It happens because no one believes in you. It happens because you do not believe in yourself." Marcus did not answer, but he understood what Morrison was saying. He understood that evil was not always born from choice. Sometimes it was born from pain and isolation and the absence of someone who believed. The trial took 3 weeks. At the end of the trial, the jury found Jack Morrison guilty of killing Sheriff Thomas Price. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging. The sentence was carried out on a morning in the spring in the city in front of witnesses. Marcus Webb was not there to see it. He did not think that was his job. His job was to protect the living, not to watch the dying. When Marcus returned to Silver Ridge, Sarah Price was waiting for him at the sheriff's office. She was holding flowers. She was wearing a green dress instead of her funeral black. She looked like a woman who had decided to live again instead of just surviving. "My father is at peace now," she said. "I can feel it. Can you feel it?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I can feel it." "I want to give you something," Sarah said. She handed Marcus a new journal. It was blank except for the first page. On the first page, she had written in her handwriting, "This journal belongs to Marcus Webb, the sheriff of Silver Ridge. My father believed in you. I believe in you. And I hope that one day you will believe in yourself. Write down your thoughts. Write down your decisions. Write down the things that matter. And when the time comes, give this journal to someone who needs to know that they are not alone." Marcus took the journal and looked at Sarah. He saw on her face all the loss that she had suffered, but he also saw something else. He saw hope. He saw the possibility of something new beginning. "Will you have dinner with me?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "I will have dinner with you, and I will have breakfast with you, and I will have all the other meals with you for the rest of my life, if you want me to." Marcus smiled. It was the first real smile he had smiled in many weeks. That evening, Marcus sat in his office and opened the new journal that Sarah had given him. He picked up a pen and began to write. He wrote about the day that Jack Morrison came to Silver Ridge. He wrote about shooting him and becoming a hero. He wrote about reading Thomas Price's journals. He wrote about understanding that he had been believed in all along. He wrote about Sarah Price and about hope and about the future. And then he wrote one final sentence, a sentence that would become the first line in a story that he would one day tell to someone who needed to hear it. The most important thing that anyone can do for another person is to believe in them before they believe in themselves. That sentence was the wisdom of Thomas Price, passed through Marcus Webb, waiting to be passed on to someone else who needed to know that they were not alone, that they were not weak, and that their life could matter if they were willing to be brave. The sun set over Silver Ridge. The town was at peace, and Marcus Webb, the young deputy who had become a sheriff, sat at his desk and wrote the words that would change someone else's life, the way that Thomas Price's belief had changed his. That is how the story continues. That is how light passes from one person to another. That is how a town becomes safe. Not because of violence, but because someone believed,